So let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to the Society of Thoracic Surgeons Congenital Heart Surgery Database. Today is Tuesday, July 15th, here for our monthly/new data manager webinar. So thanks everyone for joining today. On the call with me from the STS side, we have myself and Emily Conrad, Banu Yatsi, Nancy Honeycutt, Sydney Clinton, Chastity Rollins, and Leslie Wacker. And then I just see that one of our surgeon leaders has hopped on. Dr. Meyer has joined us. So thanks, Dr. Meyer, for joining today. So let's go ahead and cover our agenda. I'm just going to give a super brief AQO update, and then I'm going to turn things over to Chastity and Leslie for our new data manager education. They're going to go over the reporting for the CHSD. So I'll turn things over to them here momentarily. And then as always, we'll finish things up with our Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please submit those via the Q&A. We also have the raised hand function enabled. So if you prefer to just ask your question, you are welcome to do that as well. Just make sure that your microphone is enabled on your end. So again, thanks everyone for joining today. All right, AQO update. Again, AQO 2025. We've gone through this numerous times before, but just a friendly reminder that our AQO session will last from September 25th through the 26th in San Antonio, Texas. And we will be at the Grand Hyatt San Antonio Riverwalk. We do look forward to those of you joining us. We hope you're able to join us in person, but if not, we do have our virtual pass available. Our CHSD and GTSD sessions will run concurrently on Thursday, September the 25th, and then our ACSD session will be held Friday, September the 26th. And our Intermax and PDMax session will be virtual only, and that is going to be held on Tuesday, September the 23rd. All right, and also just wanted to include a link out to the STS AQO information page located here. And then also I did want to announce that the website has not been updated as of yet, but we will be extending the early bird deadline until Thursday, July the 31st. So just know that the website will be updated. Currently, right now it states early bird through July 16th, but we are looking to extend that early bird deadline to Thursday, July the 31st. And again, all information regarding AQO. Is my screen not sharing? Can you see the screen?
I see the screen.
Okay.
I can see it.
All right, sorry. But yeah, so our early bird, this information will be updated on the website as soon as possible. So, but again, we are extending that deadline to Thursday, July 31st. And of course, registration is open. And again, just a link to our registration, sts.org/AQO. All right. And again, that is all that I have. Super brief STS update. If you have any questions about AQO, please feel free to put them into the Q&A and we'll get those answered for you. But I'm going to turn things over now to Chastity and Leslie, as they have quite a bit of information to cover today for our new data manager webinar. So Chas, Leslie.
Thanks, Leanne. Hi, everyone. This is Leslie Wacker from University of Michigan Hospital. We are going to start the first of many new data manager series. Today will be on the risk-adjusted analysis, but before we get started, I just wanted to have a quick update on the FAQs. If you have some that you've submitted, we did push back our call with our surgeons just due to a bunch of different vacation schedules. So our meeting is scheduled for next week and responses should be coming out hopefully shortly thereafter. It is possible that we run a couple minutes over today. We're going to try not to, but please submit your questions via the Q&A function. And if you have to drop off, it will be recorded and posted on the website. Okay, next slide. So like I said, today we're going to focus on the analyzed reports, and we're going to be reviewing the CHSD report tools available to you, including the analysis overview report, as well as the risk adjusted report calculation resource. And then Chastity will be diving in to kind of a deeper dive into tables 1 and 16, and then a little bit about our benchmark operations analysis and lesion specific tables. Next slide. So before we get started, I just wanted to point out exactly what we're talking about. This is through IQVIA. When you log in, go to operational reports, and today we're going to be discussing the CHSD risk adjusted dashboard reports. You don't need to pull this up. We're not going to go in, line by line into the tables, but just so that you're aware of what we're talking about. Next slide. We're going to begin with the analysis overview report, talk about where it is, what it is, and when you will use it. Next slide. So if you're unaware, this is available on the STS website. This is a direct link, which you will need to be logged in to view. But if you just want to go through the website, it's sts.org. Next slide. And you'll pick the research and data tab and click on for data managers. If any of you want to pull this up, if you don't already have it open, feel free and you can kind of follow along as we go through this. Otherwise, it's under the data manager tab. Next slide. You'll scroll all the way to the bottom and click the Access Data Collection Resources. This is where if you're not already logged in, it will ask you to log in with your STS ID and password. Next slide. You'll scroll all the way down again, open the version 623 category, and under additional resources, you'll find the Spring 2025 CHSD Analysis Overview Report. Next slide. So great, I know where it is, Leslie, but what the heck is this report? Next slide. So this is a document which outlines how analysis was done for a specific reporting period. Next slide. So when you first open up this document, it says right in the middle, Spring 2025 analysis. And this is updated again with each harvest cycle. So every 6 months for us. Next slide. It has general definitions, inclusion and exclusion criteria, meaning how you get included or excluded from the report itself, as well as different tables or different line items in the report. And then it's an overview of table populations for the analyzed reports in IQVIA. Next slide. So under our general overview, it's just talking about the fact that we put these reports out every 6 months for congenital. Of course, we transitioned from a data warehouse done by DCRI to IQVIA, and during that time we had less reports. But this is all referring to those analyzed reports displayed in IQVIA. There's information here about COVID data that we collect and for the dates that cases were excluded. And then we define the analysis population. Next slide. So for all of the analysis, we are basing this upon cardiac operations or cardiovascular surgical operations. And for our purposes, these are defined as cases which have an operation type as CPV cardiovascular or no CPV cardiovascular. You also might hear us refer to this as op types 1 and 2. 1 and 2 just refer to the number that's actually represents that text, CPV cardiovascular, that's sent over for analysis. But we often say op type 1 and 2 or op type CPV cardiovascular or no CPV cardiovascular. And then mortality analysis is done on the episode of care level. So it is limited to episodes of care which contain at least one cardiovascular surgical operation. That's the overall population. Next slide. Of course, all operations that we collect, regardless of which op type is chosen, are reported in Table 1 under your overall volume. Next slide. The way that I think it's most easy to navigate the analysis overview document is to use the left-hand panel to bring up the bookmarks, and then you can kind of go through different categories. So again, the analysis overview is really giving you a general high-level overview of how analysis was handled for a reporting period. So this will tell you how STS has defined an episode of care for the cases submitted. Next slide. It will also tell you how index operations are identified and when there's multiple operations on the same day, how that is chosen. Next slide. It will go into how primary diagnosis and primary procedure are found and identified at the STS. Next slide. It will also review what fields are used for mortality calculations. So we look at mortality status at database discharge, at hospital discharge, and 30 days after the last cardiovascular surgery. It talks about ways that cases would be excluded from the report. So if you have a patient who is 2.5 kilos or less, who has a PDA ligation as their primary procedure, you're excluded. If you have one of the pacemaker or ICD procedures listed and you're under, not you, your patient is under 30 days, the case is excluded. Operations listed here cannot be a cardiovascular operation, so they are categorized as thoracic and thus not included in the analysis. And these are all things that are done at the STS level. Next slide. Those are reasons you would be excluded. And then here are some additional things that need to be included in order to not be excluded, I guess. So here we're talking about, for those cardiac cases you submit, you can have no more than 10% missing in these fields. In addition to that, your mortality field. So again, we said status at database discharge, mortality status at hospital discharge, and status 30 days after all cardiovascular surgeries must be complete. And for those specific fields, it cannot be more than 2% missing in any surgical year. Next slide. Okay, those are overviews, right? How you're in or out of the report. So when are you going to pull up this document? Next slide. So remember that this analysis overview is referring to analysis that has already happened. So it's behind us in time, right? It's the rolling four-year period. It is not a resource to use for how to code day-to-day going forward. For that, you will use the training manual, and we will have an entire session on the training manual, how to use it, what's in there, etc. Maybe even multiple, because that's a beast. But the analysis overview is talking about what has already happened to the data. Next slide. So it is great for identifying table populations, combo codes, specifically which combo codes are or aren't in a table, and exclusions, either your whole site or case by case. And Jasmine and I always recommend that you review this analysis overview in its entirety with each report release. So again, this analysis overview comes out at the same time as our 4-year analyzed reports are published. So we love when people make a habit of going through this, take a, couple hours, whatever it is, grab a cup of coffee, go through and see how things were done, what has changed. We're trying to improve this report a bit as well and highlight changes from the last reporting period to make it a little easier to identify. But scan through and see how things are done for that analysis period. Next slide. So speaking of table inclusions, another bookmark will show you all of the different tables that are in the report. I'm not going to deep dive into too much on table 1 or 16 because Chastity will get to that. But for an example, table 7 has mortality analysis, but it's broken out by patient age. So in the overview, you will find how we've defined those age categories. Next slide. Also have benchmark categories and procedure codes listed as well. So if you're looking at your VSD table and your surgeon says, hey, we do a lot more VSDs than this, you would come here to try to explain why that volume might not look right. So for an example, you have to remember this is episode of care. It's the primary procedure of the index operation, and that procedure code must be listed in this table. So it's going to be VSD repair patch or the combo VSD repair patch with an ASD closure. It doesn't include other types of VSD closures. It doesn't include when the VSD is not primary procedure. So this is defined in the analysis overview as well. Next slide. Similarly, the lesion specific tables 20 through 28 For these, again, you have to have the right diagnosis and the right procedure in the index operation of the episode of care in order to appear in these tables. So this will show you in the analysis overview exactly what those codes are to get into the table. Next slide. And as you may have noticed in red under all of these, there's a little highlight to refer to another document, the CHSD risk adjusted calculation spreadsheet or calculation resource, which is within the IQVIA library. Next slide. So we'll move on to that document next. And we'll do the same thing. We're going to review where it is, what it is, and when we would use it. Next slide. As mentioned, this is stored in the IQVIA library. So you click on library and then listed is the CHSD risk adjusted report calculation resource. I kind of covered it with my blue circle, but there is a link to the analysis overview here as well. It will just direct you to the STS site, but you can get there either way. Next slide. Okay, and what is this document? So just as a quick reminder, the way the harvest process works is generally, we submit our data using IQVIA. That data is shipped over to STS. STS applies all of those inclusion and exclusion criteria, looks for missing data, defines our primary procedure, defines an index operation, finds the episodes of care. All of that stuff that we just talked about that is listed in the analysis overview is done at STS. Those things are categorized and coded and then sent back to IQVIA to display in all of these reports. So this calculation resource is a very detailed description of those table populations. It's the fields used, it goes line by line. Next slide. I know this is hard to see, but I just wanted to kind of give an overview first, and then we'll look at a little bit more detail. Next slide. So this is what you see when you open the spreadsheet, when you go to IQVIA and open this. The top part is just how you get into the table. Next slide. The middle section is line by line definitions with like the logic that goes into each line. Next slide. And at the bottom, there's a different worksheet for each table that you can look at. Next slide. So I just pulled up, this is table 1, and I just highlighted this top part, how to get into the table. So this goes line by line, what's included. Operations submitted, all your operations and analysis needs to be the index operation type must be 1 or 2. I mentioned that earlier. So CPV cardiovascular or no CPV cardiovascular. Include equals 1, include equals yes. And that is defined by STS as it should be included. And the mortality data equals yes, meaning it is eligible for analysis. It's met all the requirements and you have the data needed to display. And then as you kind of work down, there's more things included for each line. Next slide. But how would I know what these things are, right? What is the op type? That's not a field in our database, or primary op, that's not a field in our database. Next slide. So one of the worksheets is called variable definitions. Next slide. And when you pull this up, it will give you those little variables that they're referring to. This is just sort of an STS IQVIA language. STS has done sort of their first half of this process and identified different components that then IQVIA can reference when they're displaying all of this data. Next slide. So again, you can click on different tables. So this one is table 7. Again, at the top, it shows you how to get into the table and then what each line item is reporting at the top. And then as you go through, it's line by line for both the site and over STS overall, exactly what is used in the logic to display. Next slide. Table 16, similarly here, table inclusion at the top. There's a couple more variables added once you get to table 16. And then again, line by line, what each calculation consists of. Next slide. Okay, so then when do we use this one? This is huge. It's very detailed. It's line by line. Leanne, Chastity, and I have like nightmares of going through this trying to double check logic. So this is one that you're not going to use every day. But it is really good if you want to identify exactly which patients are in a table or reported in a certain line, or how a metric is defined. So when we say this many patients had this post-operative event, how did we define that post-operative event? That logic is included. It's really good for answering questions. Sometimes our providers might have a question, like I mentioned with the VSD volume. I think I did more than whatever's reported in this report that I'm looking at. You can dig into these two different resources, but especially the risk adjusted calculation spreadsheet to see exactly how the numerators and denominators are defined. And then of course, if you're matching your local data with what's reported, or if you want to recreate any of these reports to see maybe prior to submitting, just kind of how it's going to look, you can use this logic to do that. Next slide. Okay, before I turn it over to Chas, we'll just do a quick overview. So for your analysis overview report, this is going to be high level, general overview of what, how you get in or out of the report. It's your kind of go-to day-to-day resource if you're just answering questions about the reports themselves. And it's important to read this document after each report release. And then your risk adjusted calculation resource is that huge Excel document that's very detailed. It goes line by line. And this is great to use if you want really technical information or to know which fields are used in defining the reported numbers. Okay, I'll hand it over to Chastity.
Excellent, thank you. Great. That was a great overview of the tools and resources. I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper into utilizing these tools and resources to understand then what is displayed in each of the analysis tables. So it's important to note that each table represents a different or distinct analysis on your surgical population. So each table is different from another. And so it's important that you work to understand then what is in each table. So as you go through your report, because I don't have time to go through every one of the tables that's included, but when you look at each individual table, you want to be able to identify the population in the table. So what is the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the specific table? Determine what calculations or calculation is being completed on the table population. And then you also need to be able to interpret the results of each individual table. Leslie just outlined both resources that you use to be able to determine each of these components within each table. Next slide. So let's do a deep dive into table 1, which is also called the number submitted and in analysis. Next slide. So this is a fake table with fake data, but it looks just like what the top half of your table 1 will look at. And so as you can see right off the bat by the name, as well as what's in the headings of the table, you've got a yearly breakdown. And in this case, it goes from January through December through each of the 4 included analytic years. And then it has a summary column for the last 4. So in this example, it's January of 21 through December of 24. So who is the population in this table? That's the first thing we want to be able to identify. I'm going to go look at my analysis overview and anything else. And I know just by the table title as well as the headings that this is the volume of surgery by year, and then in total for 4 years. And you know what's in blue is represented by the participant or perhaps my program, and then STS is in that fleshy, peachy, pinky color. Next slide. So I then go to the report overview, which Leslie just told us how to access and look at and find out what each of these headings mean. So operations submitted is all operations submitted that has a surgical date within the analytic time period. So between January of 21 through December of 2024, every case I submitted will be in this operation submitted. Then it gets broken down into operations and analysis and patients in analysis. And you'll see that operations and analysis are all of those that were submitted by you within that analytic time period, these 4 years, with an op type of 1 or 2. As Leslie said, those are represented as CPB cardiovascular or no CPB cardiovascular. Here you see your first exclusion of anyone that was positive for COVID-19 during surgical years 2020 and 2021. This is also true of then patients in analysis. So the difference between operations in analysis and patients in analysis is it's index operations. And again, excluding those COVID positive cases. So as you look up in this fake chart up above, you see that operations submitted, this program had 580 that were submitted in the surgery year of 2021. The number of operations and analysis, or those that are op type CPB cardiovascular or no CPB cardiovascular, 480. So you lost a few patients that had op types that were not cardiac in nature. And then from 480 to 350 down to the patients in analysis, you know that these are your index operations. So that is defined as the first cardiac operation that occurs during your episode of care. So you already see how these cases get truncated through those first few rows of table 1. Next slide. This is another way of then looking at that. And I just like the graphic of the triangle, just that you see the population is getting smaller. So again, it says exactly what the previous slide said. All operations submitted fall under your operations submitted. Operations and analysis are then your cardiac operations, and patients and analysis are then those index operations. So at this point in time, next slide, there are no exclusions other than the COVID-19 positive. So this does include patients who are still hospitalized, whether within your program or another program. This includes operations that have missing data that you know will not be included in the mortality analysis, and then operations that will be excluded from the analysis for any other reasons. So think of things like PDA ligations done in patients that weigh less than 2.5 kilos. So all of those right now are all in these top numbers. But they're going to get excluded then later. Leslie and I are working right now with STS leadership of renaming these fields of operations submitted, operations and analysis, since we think they're kind of misnomers, and it would be better to just call them what they are, cardiac operations or index operations and such. So we're working with that. And so hopefully coming to a report soon that you will see that. Next slide. So then we go to the next section of table 1, and we know it is operative mortality. And so what calculation is being performed on the specific table population is just your overall operative mortality. So you can again see it's by the same 4-year surgical analytical window. And now you see mortalities, who's eligible, the percentage mortality, and then your 95% confidence interval for that mortality. Next slide. I think I've just said exactly what yep. But you must be eligible for mortality analysis to then get into this part of the table. So you're already up in the top part of table 1, and the only thing thus far that's been excluded is COVID-19. So now in this next part of the overall operative mortality, you must be eligible to be included. So Leslie just went over the analysis overview. Again, this is what goes into the mortality calculation, which we went over. We're going to break this down and go into an example. So next slide, Liam. So who is eligible in the mortality analysis? Again, you're going to start with an index operation, since we know that defines all of the analysis in the database. So you have to start with an index operation, excluding those COVID cases from 2020 and 21. Next. Now you have to have all of the mortality analysis fields complete. So this is where patients with missing data or who are still in-house get taken out. They're not eligible for analysis. So if you don't have a date of admission, if you don't have a primary diagnosis and a primary procedure, or mortality status at hospital discharge, database discharge, or 30 days post a cardiac operation, you will be ineligible for the mortality analysis. Next slide. So then there are other exclusions that occur at this level of mortality analysis as well. And this means you have to have an eligible index operation. So in other words, a primary procedure that's eligible to be analyzed. So like I said previously, PDA exclusions that are extreme preemies or that weigh less than 2.5 kilos at the time of their PDA ligation will be excluded. Pacemaker or ICD procedures done on neonates are excluded. Pectus repairs, bronchoscopies, organ procurement, all are excluded. We have since added in the overlapping episode of care, which was included in this harvest. And then as well as there's a process called op-type cleanup. And that's where repairs like pectus repairs and bronchoscopies get cleaned up. In case you mark those as cardiac op-types, they get excluded based on what those procedures are. So all of these now get taken out and go into that number of who is eligible for mortality analysis. Next slide. So I told you when you looked at the top part of table 1, you have patients in analysis, and those are index operations. And then when you get down to the operative mortality section, number eligible, and you'll see in my fake program here that they had 1,350 total in 4 years of patients in analysis versus 1,329 that were available or eligible for the mortality analysis. And this is related to those exclusions. There could be patients that are in-house. There are neonates that had PDA ligations. There are pacemaker procedures done in neonates. So each program is going to be different as to what was included up above under patients in analysis versus who is eligible for mortality. This is one of the first places that I look when I get my report to make sure I know who is eligible for mortality analysis and that there are no surprises. Next slide. Okay, so then when we move on in table 1, you will now see it's operative mortality by stat category. So who is the population? Anyone who's made it into table 1 that was appropriate or eligible for mortality calculation. And then now what calculation is being performed? So next slide. So you must be eligible for mortality analysis, but now you have to have an associated stat mortality score or category. Next slide. So we're going to do the same thing. It's the same exclusions, same inclusions, but you have to have an operation with an appropriate or an applied associated stat mortality category and score. So we know that there are procedures that we do that don't have stat scores, and it can still be the primary procedure of an operation. So it will have been included in your overall mortality analysis, but then when stratified by stat score, it's not included there. And so I have one case in this harvest where this happened, where we did a procedure, a cardiac procedure. There, it's cardiac other. And so while the patient died and they hit my overall operative mortality numbers, it doesn't hit any of the numerators or denominators when you stratify that by stat score. Next slide. So again, as we look at this, we have our total number of mortalities, those index operations that are eligible for mortality calculation. We calculate that percent by taking the number of mortalities divided by the number eligible times 100. And then we have this thing called the 95% confidence interval. And I don't mean this to be a statistics lesson, but if you have a basic understanding of what the 95% confidence interval is, it'll be very helpful as you go through your reports. And basically, it is a plausible range of values where a participant's true underlying mortality rate lies. Next slide. So if we look at an example using our 95% confidence interval, we use that to determine if your observed, your program or participant's mortality rate is different from a true mortality rate. So is it true or is it due to random chance? And essentially what we're looking for here is statistical significance to tell us if it is true or due to random chance. Next slide. So again, the 95% confidence interval is that plausible range of where your true underlying mortality rate lies. If it is a small interval or a small range, that's a more precise estimate of what your true mortality rate is. If you are a small volume program, this can be problematic for you because this estimate is impacted by the denominator size, and you won't have enough statistical power to show statistical significance or know if your mortality rate is true versus due to random chance if you don't have enough power in your denominator or enough eligible operations. So this can be hard, and you may have to just use the data to trend. Next slide. But you're going to compare your participant mortality rate. Is it higher or lower than that of the STS aggregate? And then does the confidence interval contain that STS mortality rate? Next slide. So taking an example here where on the top is the participant in blue and then our peachy fleshy color is the STS on the bottom. So is the participant mortality rate higher or lower than that of the STS mortality rate? So the participant is 1.58 versus STS at 2.7%. Next slide. So this should be easy. The participant mortality rate is lower than the STS mortality rate. Next slide. But is this true, or is it due to random chance? We can't just say that the program is performing better or has a lower mortality rate than the STS until we take in the statistical factor of the 95% confidence interval. Next slide. So does the participant's 95% confidence interval contain the STS mortality rate? So the confidence interval is 1.35 to 3.15. And we know that the STS mortality rate is 2.7. So next slide. We know that then the participant's 95% confidence interval does indeed contain the STS mortality rate of 2.7%. Next slide. Therefore, even though the participant's mortality rate of 1.58 is less than the STS mortality rate of 2.7, because the 95% confidence interval contains the STS mortality rate, the participant's mortality rate is not statistically different than that of the STS mortality rate. So in other words, you can't say that your mortality rate is less than STS with any statistical significance. It could be due to random chance because that interval is the 1.35 to 3.15 is an interval where your value could lie anywhere within that interval. Which then could be higher than the STS mortality rate. So this is really due to chance. Next slide. So now let's get into our model. So a lot of the other tables use the same mortality calculation throughout them. And so you can apply the same knowledge and what you've learned from table 1 throughout all the tables. You're just looking at who the population is and what specific analysis is being done. So for example, some of the tables are done by age or by stat mortality category, in which case then you would know what your neonatal mortality rate is. And you would look at that and then associated 95% confidence interval utilizing the STS mortality rate for the same age group, neonates, adults, whomever you're looking at. So now as we go into table 16, this is our model, or what's called model 1 participant report. Next slide. So now we have a different slice of the data. So this table for the last 4 years, so it's not broken down by individual years, but it's looking at the data for the whole 4-year analytic window. We need to be able to identify who the population is in this table and what calculation is being performed. And of course, I want to know, why is this table different than table 1 or any of the other tables we've looked at? If we bother to put in a table, it is different in some capacity. Next slide. So when we get to table 16, it's all the same. You have to have an eligible index operation. You have to have your analysis fields complete. You have to, that we're going to exclude and get down to the eligible index operations. And then we're going to add in a few more inclusions for table 16. So you have to have a valid patient age. You have to have a procedure with a stat score. So in my case where I said I have one patient that we did a cardiac procedure that does not have a stat score, they will not be in table 16. You have to have your operations and demographic versions in 3.0 or greater. So this is where it's important that you do update your demographic record. Also, then there's something called a weight for age z-score between -7 and 5. This is a way to take out your weight for age score to get rid of outliers. So severe micropremies, or perhaps severe obese patients on the other side for their age. And so we're getting rid of kind of extreme cases, because that's not who we want to put in this table. I am a large volume program. I rarely have anyone excluded for the age for weight z-score. Next slide. All right, so let's break this down. The number of observed mortalities is exactly that, the number of mortalities reported in your data. Remember all of your inclusions and exclusions, including there must be a stat score. Number eligible then is the index operations that are eligible for mortality calculation in table 16. So again, version, age for weight, z-score, all of that goes into play. Your percent observed then is the number of observed mortalities divided by the number of eligible operations times 100. And then we have this 95% expected. This is a statistical estimation of deaths given your patient's surgical risk. How does this model know what your patient's surgical risk is? This is the job you do. It is all the pre-op factors you collect. It is the, well, select ones get included in the model, but it's the work that you do to collect this information. And so your pre-op factors, your anatomic abnormalities outside of cardiac abnormalities, your syndromes, your chromosomal abnormalities, prior operations, all of that goes into this statistical estimation. So of course, what you would want is you're expected to be different from your observed, right? And so you would want, and we're going to get a ratio from this. And so instead of mortality percent, it really should say observed to expected. And then your 95%, we'll clean this up before we post it, but your 95% confidence interval, again, is that same definition, the plausible range of values where the true underlying mortality rate is. Next slide. So how do we interpret the O to E ratio with now the 95% confidence interval? So I put in some fake numbers up here. And of course, to get an O to E ratio that's less than 1, we want our expected, our estimated risk to be high and our observed number of mortalities to be low. That way, in math, your O to E ratio will be less than 1. And you'll see as we go through this. Next slide. So interpretation of the O to E ratio, less than 1, the participant had fewer deaths than expected. If it's greater than 1, then the participant had more deaths than expected, given the risk factors of their patients. So next slide. So is it true or due to random chance? So as I showed you in that data before, we did have a confidence interval that was less than 1. But again, we need to go back to that 95% confidence interval to really see if there's a difference, a statistical significant difference from the aggregate STS. So if 1.0 is contained within that 95% confidence interval, then it's not statistically different. If the interval fully excludes 1, then there is statistical difference. Next slide. So as we look at these fake numbers here, I'm going to ask you the same questions. Is the participant O to E ratio greater or less than 1.0? The O to E ratio up top here is 0.64. Next slide. So that the participant O to E ratio is less than 1. But is this true or due to random chance? Now we're going to look at that 95% confidence interval. So does it contain the value of 1.0? So our interval is 0.35 to 0.98. Next slide. So 1.0 is not contained within the confidence interval. The confidence interval fully excludes the value of 1. 1 comes after 0.98. Next slide. So now we can say with an O to E ratio of less than 1, and a 95% confidence interval that fully excludes 1, the participant's risk-adjusted mortality rate is less than the STS aggregate. So this is where you see on your reports where it says you're performing as expected, better than expected, or worse than expected. This participant is performing better than expected. And that is the logic that's used to determine if someone is performing as or better than expected. Next slide. So just a few statements then about the benchmark ops and lesion specific sections. Next slide. So as we look at our benchmark operations, these are 10 procedures that are commonly performed within the database. How you get into this table, again, we're going to go back to Leslie's tools of both that analysis overview in addition to the spreadsheet, so you can see who gets into each table, but it's determined by the primary procedure of an eligible episode of care with an index operation. These are not risk adjusted yet. And I think one important thing to note with the post-op length of stay, it is calculated with the database discharge date. It does exclude patients who stay greater than a year, and it excludes in-hospital mortality. So in your surgical hospital, if a patient dies, we're not calculating the post-op length of stay utilizing that case. And this makes sense. If all of your Norwoods die on post-op day 2, then all of your Norwoods would have a length of stay of 2 days. So that's not adding anything to a post-op length of stay of Norwood patients for the entire database. So in surgical hospital mortalities are excluded. Now, if your patient were to transfer to another hospital, say I transfer a patient to Leslie in Michigan, and that patient dies then at the University of Michigan, that death and that length of stay through their database discharge date would show up in the calculation. So it's important to note, if you're ever calculating your own length of stay, that you know these little caveats. These are all spelled out in that analysis overview, as well as in the spreadsheet. Next slide. Let's now dive into some lesion-specific analytics. Next slide. So this is tables 20 through 28. There are 9 lesions that are included, and how you get into these is determined by also your primary procedure with an eligible episode of care with an index operation. And there's specific inclusion criteria that includes a specific pairing of diagnosis and procedure. So you may see a difference in, say, your VSD repairs in your benchmark table versus the number of VSD repairs in this table, because now it's dependent on having one of the included diagnoses. There are post-op events that are reported here. This is the one section where we get into some of the post-op event analysis. And you'll notice that currently there is overlap between the cases from version 341 to 623. So you have to interpret those with caution, because of course in 623, when we pick that there was an unplanned cardiac reoperation, we now have more detail and can say, this is how many of those operations were for bleeding. This is how many of those operations were for mediastinal explorations. Whereas in 341, we had 2 separate categories, right? Reoperation for bleeding, as well as just an unplanned cardiac reop. And we couldn't get into the detail of the reason for the unplanned cardiac reop. So a little bit of nuanced data as you interpret your postoperative events. Next slide. So in summary of everything Leslie and I had to say today is know your tools. Read that analysis report overview with each harvest. We are going to try to do a better job of highlighting what's new from the last report to the newest one out, just so you have an idea of perhaps what has changed from the previous one that you read in full, in detail. And then you can have highlights for the next time around. Remember to review each table separately. We would not include another table if it was the exact same population and the exact same analysis. So sometimes it's a different display of data that it's in a graphical form instead of a table of numbers. Sometimes it's that your population is stratified by a stat score, by a specific operation, by patient age. So just pay attention to who your population is, and utilize those tools then to look at the calculations being performed, and then of course being able to interpret those calculations. And I think I'm done.
Yes, ma'am. Good job. Chastity, Leslie, thank you. That was a phenomenal presentation. I continue to learn from you guys every single day, so that was amazing. So we have a couple of questions. So if you do have questions for Chas and Leslie or myself, please put those into the Q&A. We have a couple of questions. So I think, Leslie, you said you wanted to tackle these first 2 questions. From Nancy, she wanted to know if the pacemaker under 30 days was a new exclusion.
Yep, it is not a new exclusion. I don't remember exactly which harvest report that came out with, but it has been for a number of years.
It's a long-standing for
Yeah.
at least 10 years or more.
Yeah, I think so. I was trying to go back while we were wrapping up that call, and I can't find an exact date, but it has been for a while. The next question from Amy, is there a list of major morbidities? The training manual refers to them, and in IQVIA, it's only pulled as one or more of the major morbidity events. I recall discussion on this in a previous webinar. There is not a concrete list. For what is being reported, you can create your own list if you like by searching the training manual for major event timeframe. That's what it's referring to when we say those major events in the training manual. We're talking about the events that are collected on that major event timeframe, which is all the way through database discharge or 30 days post-op, regardless of location. Those are the things that are included, like unplanned cardiac reops, unplanned interventional cath, non-cardiac reops, cardiac arrest, mechanical circulatory support, arrhythmia, I think permanent pacemaker,
Paralyzed
trachs,
diaphragm.
renal failure, paralyzed diaphragm, and neurodeficit present at discharge. But there's a couple reasons why there is not an exact list. One of those being, as Chastity alluded to, it's not a one-to-one match with our previous version. And there is still discussion amongst the workforce and surgeon leaders as to what exactly we want to include as quote unquote major. So for an example, non-cardiac reops are now, they don't need to be unplanned to be collected. Do we really want to consider all G tubes to be major? Do we want to consider, a patient that has a planned procedure following a cardiac operation, but it's non-cardiac? Should that be included? So that's one of the reasons we don't have that concrete list. When we do, or when any analysis is done specifically on those, then of course we will provide a list with the code so you're aware.
Okay, so next question, Brooke, for calculating the post-op length of stay, what's the reason for mortality exclusion related to hospital discharge status versus database discharge status? So hospital discharge status, remember, we would end up potentially truncating for those patients who die early following their repair, would make it look as though their length of stay is short following, let's say, something complex like a truncus or a Norwood repair. And so we don't want to not have an adequate length of stay. They would have stayed longer had they survived their surgery, right? And so we thought from a, analysis perspective, it was best to get rid of the in-hospital mortalities. However, we still want to include the longer length of stays by those patients that are transferred to either they stay in your facility for a longer length of time versus go to a higher or perhaps even lower standard of care. And so the database discharge became an important piece of that. Now, if upon database discharge, the patient stays greater than a year, so my hospital, they stayed, X amount of time, and then they transferred to another hospital and stayed past the 365 days in total, then the patient gets excluded. So there's an exclusion on that end as well. But you're really looking at the true time it took for a patient to recover from their cardiac surgery, from post-op all the way to discharge. But again, if you're a program that did 10 Norwoods and all 10 of your Norwoods died on post-op day 4, that's not really a likely length of stay for a patient that has undergone a Norwood procedure. But I would contribute then 10 Norwood operations with a length of stay of 4 days, which, multiply that across the country. And then our length of stay is kind of skewed by death, if that makes sense. So I hope that answers your question. If not, I can get you a better answer from the surgeons.
That's a great explanation, Jess.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I would say age for weight Z-scores. The software vendor does not calculate it. It is something that's done on the analytical end. And, but we do include the calculation in the report overview. It is there. So it is the CDC's formula for calculating it. So you can see it, but it is not done within your software.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go. It is, I think there's online calculators if you were curious patient by patient, but of course, probably not going to calculate it for all 3,000 or however many are in your submission.
And I can take this one from Amy. I think it was stated on the last webinar that the revised harvest report with updated tables 18 and 19 would be included in the July 12 IQVIA update. There's not a notification in the IQVIA platform that these released. Can you confirm if this happened or not? When will it? Yeah, so it was included. And thank you for letting me know that, Amy, that was not posted within the notifications. I will send an email out to IQVIA after this call and have them post that within the notifications. But yes, those tables were updated with those updated calculations. So I will have them post that announcement. Thank you for letting me know. All right. I think you said you had a query to check your weights in the past. Can you remind me how you did that?
I have a down and dirty method for doing this. I create a pivot table of my data that lists every patient by weight, height, and age. And then I'll sort them first by weight, and then I sort them by height. And so what I look at is someone who's a neonate likely doesn't weigh 40 kilos. And someone who's an adult likely doesn't weigh 5 kilos. And so what I do end up with though is, I've got people on, I do have adult patients who are severely emaciated with heart failure, right? And so they do have very low surgical weights at the time. But it's a down and dirty way really to look at those extreme ends of heights and weights. And I just do a quick check right before I decide that my data is good to be submitted. There may be better way. Leslie, do you have a fancy way?
No, I don't look unless I have an issue. So what I do is find the patients that didn't make it to table 16. And if I can't figure out why else, I just look them up individually and see, did I enter the weight incorrectly? Is there something like that? But no, I don't have a way. I don't look at I've never actually even used the online calculator. I think that you can go through the CDC website and enter patients' BMI and age, but I have not used it personally. I just look individually if I have cases that were excluded and I can't figure it out otherwise.
All right. While we're waiting for additional questions, just an update on our next monthly webinars. They're currently scheduled for August 19 and September 16. Same time, 12 p.m. Central. So those are our next monthly webinars. And then also, as usual, our contact information. If you have any questions related to your report, Chastity and Leslie just did a phenomenal job going through explaining our reports. But if you do have questions, specifically, as Leslie was just saying, she could not identify if she was having issues identifying, why a patient was excluded. If you do have patients that you can't account for or that you don't understand why they're excluded, please reach out to us, our tech support as the STSDB help desk. So please reach out for any report related questions or any data submission related questions. Email stsdb_helpdesk@sts.org, and our team will be able to assist you. If you have questions related to STS contracts or database participation, you can reach out to stsdb@sts.org. Or if you're not sure who to contact, just reach out to the help desk, stsdb_help desk. They'll route your question accordingly and get you to the right team. So, I think that is it. I do not see any additional questions coming in. And we are exactly on time. So well done, Chas and Leslie. That was, again, phenomenal presentation. We will get this recording posted and available to you all should be hopefully by the end of this week. So if you do have any questions, again, please feel free to reach out to us. Chas, Leslie, amazing job, amazing presentation. As always. Oops, somebody had their hand raised. I'm sorry. I just saw that as I looked up. If you did have your hand raised. Okay, hold on, Cindy. Hi, Cindy, did you have a question? I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
No, I'm sorry. I hit it by accident.
Oh, okay. No worries. But
Sorry.
no, not a problem at all. It's great to hear your voice though. All right. So with that, oh, Nancy, did you raise yours by accident? Sorry about that. Okay. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining today. We appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions, just please feel free to reach out. Great job, Chas, Leslie.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.